And what I'm going to go through is just an overview of some of the silviculture and genetic management projects and strategies that we use in Wisconsin to try to promote the occurrence of white pine on the landscape. And I saw that Glenn Stanos had presented earlier this morning, and so there might be some of the white pine blister material that might be a bit of overlap, but in the interest of not compressing too far into lunch, there might be pieces of that we can gloss over. And again, if there's comments from the audience or questions, probably wait to the end because I have no way of seeing if hands are up. And again, I don't know if my presentation goes well or bad, so if you want to sneak out, I'll never know and I won't be offended. So, in Wisconsin, we have a number of partners that we work with to manage white pine. The U.S. Forest Service, especially with the O'Connell River Seed Orchard, a lot of our program history goes back to connections to the Forest Service, as well as work with the University of Wisconsin and Menominee Tribal Enterprises. Menominee really has done some good work and innovative work around white pine management, and certainly we look to them for a lot of leadership in terms of some of the silviculture practices that we have adopted. Our trials of white pine go back over 40 years, and we also have a connection between the genetics program and the state nursery program. So the picture I have up on screen was our white pine cone collection from 2 years ago, and that's going to last us for at least 10 years, I think. That's what we have there. In terms of white pine in a silvicultural context in the state, there's no official state target for regeneration, and so it's not a specifically outlined goal to increase the proportion of white pine in the state, and so it's more on a property-to-property basis or in the hands of our private lands foresters, and the way white pine is managed is more land managers are aware that that's been a missing component ecologically from a number of sites, and they try to increase presence on sites where it's appropriate. And that's more to compensate for turn-of-the-century removals from Wisconsin's cutover period. But again, it's more of an intangible target. It's not something that we track on sort of a statewide performance basis. There's a lot of, I guess there's been a number of attitudinal changes in Wisconsin that have affected how we manage white pine. In the 1970s, there was a lot of frustration with trying to regenerate white pine, both in the face of tip weevil and blister rust. And there really became sort of a prevalent attitude that white pine was too difficult to try to regenerate, and so foresters really shied away from using it as a first choice on sites. But as blister rust programs improved and some of the silvicultural techniques to manage sites for blister rust really became proven, there's been a gradual acceptance since the 1990s that really you can manage white pine on a statewide basis. It's really a site-to-site focus, that it's really trying to do site management on blister rust prone areas that seems to be where we still have struggles. So in Wisconsin, white pine is very common in the northern half of the state. It also grows well in plantations in the southern half of the state. It's abundant on wet mesic and nutrient-poor sands. It really occupies in central Wisconsin, where we have sort of a large content of sandy soils, but some of them are wet sites that white pine really tends to be a site occupier on those sites, and especially sort of out of a normal context, that some of the wetter sites in those central sands really have a high component of white pine, and it's something that's relatively unique to growing on some of those wetter sites. White pine, again, is common on more classic sites like those dry sands, and in our hardwoods, white pine is a mixed component, and it tends to be increasing on sites where we have good white pine seed sources. It's almost sort of a reversal of a selection trend, that as those sites are managed and white pine isn't as large of a target for removal in those hardwood stands, that component has been increasing on a statewide basis. For natural regeneration, really within common practice, one of the challenges for white pine restoration here is trying to get regeneration where we're missing seed sources on site. In a number of sections in northwest Wisconsin, white pine restoration is something that land managers want to undertake, but on many of the sites they don't have an existing component of white pine that they can use for assisted regeneration or natural regeneration. So they often have to look to artificial regen or planting if they're going to set up the site so they can get a higher white pine component in it. Through some of the operational trials that we've done in the state, really trying to do site preparation and harvests that are timed with good cone crop forecasting is important. We've really seen on the year-and-hold demonstration for us that this is trying to forecast cone crops is key to having success in understory treatments. Most of our white pine treatments are outlined in the Silviculture handbook that's managed by the Division of Forestry. And what we started doing in the state also is this is a spin-off in terms of artificial regen, is there's been a growing interest in the state around direct seeding. Some of the early direct seeding projects were around jack pine in the north, oak and black walnut in the south, and people have often thrown white pine direct seeding into the mix sort of as an experimental project. If they have a project area that they were trying to set up for jack pine, they said, well, we might as well try some white pine too if we're going to do if we're going to be setting up a trial area. There's some of these on the Northwest County forests, as well as demonstration forest trials, again, in northern Wisconsin. And the biggest problem here we've found there's been a lot of issues with seed predation because the seed is large enough that birds and small mammals really are attracted to it. And we've had some success when we use treated seed to offset that. But again, we've often found that to do direct seeding projects, the cost of the white pine seed to use in direct seeding tends to be prohibitive as well versus, say, using jack pine. For planting projects, related to the picture you can see on the right of the slide, in southern Wisconsin, white pine has been used as a trainer tree for hardwoods and not really intended to be a permanent part of those southern plantations. But in north and central part of Wisconsin, there's really been, I guess I don't know if I'd say they're arguing, but there's two schools of thought on it. There's really the plant white pine in full sun and manage it in the face of the associated pests that come with that, namely tip weevil, as opposed to planting it in an understory or something that's doing a planting and limiting light to also try to control pests. I guess that trade-off between what you get for full sun encouraging quicker, more vigorous growth of the white pine, forester to forester will argue in terms of which they think the better approach is. And so when we do trials, we really try to do both sets of those tests to run both sort of full sun trials as well as understory plantings. And again, the references there, you see Dan Puvans for the full sun pests. It's really, Menominee was again sort of the leader in the state in doing those trials of planting at a high density, planting in full sun, and just looking and finding that trees that have high vigor and high density plantings and regenerations tend to sort of push through an early stage of tip weevil and white pine on some sites. In terms of blister rust, again, the broad statewide general approach is to manage blister rust through silviculture techniques, aiming for high density regeneration either through natural or artificial treatments to ensure that if there are losses to white pine blister rust, that there's enough stocking on site to carry that site to be successfully regenerated. Again, some of the guidance for picking sites to avoid for white pine are again classic if there's an occurrence of rabies, sites with heavy dew and frost, north-facing sites, small harvest openings which don't allow either light penetration and or airflow, and also a unique one is for us again on Lake Superior sites with a water-facing aspect. We get a high incidence of blister rust on those sites as well, and so on those sites and those slopes, we try to discourage white pine management unless it's a key part of a restoration plan or sort of being a representative species on a site that's being harvested or treated. For the genetic side of white pine blister rust, our program, I guess we tend to be more on a working partner on that blister rust research, that we try to take research that's going on and take work that's been done by our partners, either partners with the university or with the Forest Service, and we try to turn those into either seed supplying orchards or operational and genetic trials where we try to go from the clonal size to something where we can supply our nurseries with enough seed to meet production. At that scale, we tend to do bottom-up testing, so on those sites that have been turned into seed orchards, if we find that some of the clones within that are having high incidence of blister rust selection, we try to remove those clones, but continue them, managing them for a seed production aspect. I'll run through briefly some of the test sites that we do have at Hayward, Sawyer Creek, Black River Falls, and Lake Tomahawk. At the Hayward Nursery, there's a small trial that's been put in 2005 using National Forest selections and some wild selections from Wisconsin that were put in between 85 and 94. The progeny from these clones that are on the Urinholt demonstration forest in an underplanting setting. And again, this is something that's going to be different than our usual trials are done in sort of an open field test. So we're going to, I guess the hopes are to see if we get different results from those trials when they're planted in under an existing white pine overstory. We have another site at Sawyer Creek. This is some of the early selections from the 83 selections, and these were again selections that were given to us from the Forest Service, and we use this is one of the sites that we use heavily for white pine seed collection for nursery stock. Recently, this would recent as far as 2004, we removed selection 235 or 325. Again, this is something that was coming up consistently in terms of we had lost a number of trees in this test to blister rust, and in some of our other the additional trials that were planted on site. So we decided to take that one out of production from the orchard, which was well timed. We timed it with an overall spacing reduction because it was becoming more difficult to collect seed from the orchard due to the size of the trees. Also on the same site, there are a number of progeny tests from 12 of these families from 1983, and this was done by Shane Weber in our Forest Health Department. And the data from this, we haven't gotten around to collection or analyzing these tests. There's a large number of these trials on the site, and we're trying to get to what we can. And so this is on the to-do list, but we haven't gotten there yet. We have sites, a paired site at Lake Tomahawk and Black River Falls in Wisconsin, and Black River Falls is on the next slide. And these planted in 2002 and 2003 using a Contra River seed orchard and Wisconsin wild selections. And we're managing these not exclusively as blister rust tests, which are being managed then in the future to seed orchards, but we're also looking at growth and form. On the Lake Tomahawk site, and Dr. Stanos helped us out with this, was we did a survey for blister rust incidence was the intent of the survey, but we found that there was limited damage to the site or pressure to the site, and we found that mostly tip weevil was our prevalence there. And through some discussions, we found that the intent was that we put the site in a high blister rust area, but local to the area, there had been a lot of Conservation Corps work on rabies eradication in the area. And so our assumption so far is that we really didn't have enough pressure on site to give us some of the results that we needed. And this is in contrast to the second site we have of Black River Falls, Wisconsin, which is planted along a riverside which is thick with rabies. And so we get, again, in sort of in a forest health sense. So when you talk about forest health, people are excited to have trees die. And so, in that case, we had the pressure that we wanted to be put on these trees, that we got very good survey results. We haven't fully analyzed them yet, but it's been very interesting that sort of an initial look through, it seems like selections that were from the local area around Black River Falls have had the lowest incidence of blister rust. And this put a question mark into my head that I guess I'm always curious that there was a presentation that I saw a year or two ago that was talking about in the southern U.S. sort of local variants and local resistance to strains of root rot, and I wonder if that would be something worth investigating with white pine blister as a genetic variance within the rust itself that might be adapted to or in competition with locally adapted populations of white pine. So in Wisconsin, we've also done seed zone testing and work at some older tests in the early 80s of southern Appalachian white pine. The Appalachian trees were planted in tests that also had local selections, and it was more the results of these local selections that helped us determine what the seed zone was in the state. And as predicted, our seed zone in the state for white pine tends to follow the tension zone between northern and southern Wisconsin, and so we try to use those as our limits for seed movement for white pine within the state. The Appalachian sources grew well in southern Wisconsin, and we've been interested to see if we can recreate some of these tests again in northern Wisconsin to see if we can get any better results sort of with a change in climate. Some of the work that we've shown is in the state. Some studies that have been done have shown that we've had a significant warming between 1950 and 2000, either 2001 or 2006, and we've had, for agriculture, an additional 4 weeks of growing season have been added on since then, and so hoping that we might be able to detect some of those changes to the results of tests that we had done since the 80s if we had the resources to conduct some of those trials. So I just wanted to give you a quick run of the overview of our efforts around white pine within the state. Again, the emphasis here is silviculture management as opposed and using the work with genetic work around white pine and getting resistance as the secondary treatment on sites that even through silviculture management that we can't get to work with blister on those sites, that we want to add in some resistant selections to be planted on those sites to further increase the chances of regeneration success. And again, what we're getting into now is sort of the confounding effects of other pests that affect pests and diseases that may affect pines. And there's, again, work starting on nosum within the state as one example of sort of a new confounding effect on our efforts with white pine. And so, again, just a brief overview, and hopefully the audio worked out well on your end, and I'm certainly open to take some questions if we have time before lunch. And I think we'll see how we can run that, if we run that through the phone or if Mike can relay them for me.
Thank you, Avery. That was very good. We'll ask for questions. Are there any questions from the audience?
There's one in the way back.
Okay. What are you doing for weed control and direct seedings?
Weed control and direct seeding, we're in a bit of a bind. I don't know if we've quite figured it out. Most of our direct seeding sites where we've had the opportunity on open sites, we use pre-emergence to treat those sites, but under FSC we can't use those pre-emergence anymore. What we did on a demonstration site, which was direct seeding under an existing white pine, under thin white pine, and there was a lot of maple competition. We went in with a sprayer spraying It was glyphosate, but it was in a powered trailer that we pulled behind an ATV on that site, and we treated the site. And the results, it worked well, but I don't know if it would be cost effective. You need almost something that was more dedicated. What I've seen besides that, and I don't know if we would get to this big a scale, is using a skidder-mounted air blast sprayer to treat that understory competition, and that's something that I know in Eastern Ontario they use fairly often on larger sites to try to treat that understory.
Thank you, Avery. Just so you know, we appreciate your efforts. Let's give Avery a good applause. Okay. Thank you.
Works pretty well.
I'm here. He's going to just talk for like 5 minutes. Quick history at the Pacific Forest Center. We have 1 from 12 to 1. We're going to be pushing getting everything through in an hour. Right after lunch, we have the awards. So if you're a little less inclined to, don't mind being a little bit late, if you don't mind getting towards the end of the line, but I expect we'll have spillover during the awards, and I'm going to be doing the first award, so it's okay. So I'll give Ron 5 minutes here.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, first of all, I want to thank Carrie and Mike for giving me this opportunity to stand between you and London.